I went to the Ripley Aquarium today. You guys been to there here in Toronto? My wife and I go to lots of aquariums, and we enjoy them. And it prompted a lot of questions that I thought might get us to talk a little bit more about evolution, about the public understanding of evolution, and what the roadblocks to that understanding might be, if that's...
Great. I'm glad you say aquariums, not aquaria, by the way, here. We're speaking English, not Latin here.
Oh, see, and I could steal a joke from Judah Friedlander right now, but I won't, about English. I keep missing my thing. So we were at the Ripley Aquariums, and we, of course, saw many wonderful animals there. And if that, for my wife and I, prompts a discussion about what we used to believe, or whether or not, because I can't recall if I always accepted. I know I was taught about evolution in school, but I can't recall if I always accepted it. It seemed to always be colored with this idea that there was a God in there monkeying around somewhere. Is there any realistic probability that any thinking agent could have been monkeying around in the process based on what we know at this point?
No. I have to be careful here because I was once being interviewed on television by a dreadful man whose name has mercifully escaped me. And I didn't realize that he was a sort of plant for intelligent design. And he asked me whether I could think of any what's the best scenario I could think of for life on this planet being intelligently designed. And so I thought, well, I'll give him the best shot, which is directed panspermia, the idea that Francis Crick and Leslie Orgel put out, which was that some alien civilization in a distant planet wanted to preserve their form of life. Perhaps they were going extinct or something of that sort. So they put bacteria of their form of life in the nose cone of a spaceship and sent it off into space, and it landed here and started life here. Now, I said, of course, I don't for a moment believe that, but you've asked me what's the best possibility for life to be designed in this by an alien. And he said, wait a minute. Richard Dawkins believes in little green men. And this has dogged me ever since. And I regularly get on Twitter, this is the guy who believes in aliens seeding life on this planet and so on.
This is something we've spoken about before, where it seems that there are some people who are going to either intentionally misunderstand and misrepresent what you've said, what anybody said, or they are so horribly confused that they don't seem to understand the basics of the English language. Now, I know that many of them are from the United States, and we've kind of butchered the English language. But as I walked around the aquariums today, and I made that note too, that there were multiples, my wife mentioned something to me that you see just at the aquariums a broad diversity of life. And I can understand how someone who hasn't been trained and taught about natural selection and the process and the length of time involved could look at this and just say, I give up. I don't understand. It has to be magic. Somebody has to have done it. We should be teaching this. I know there are schools in the United States that don't, even though they're supposed to. Apart from just saying this needs to be the curriculum, what can we as a community do to encourage the sort of teaching and training on evolutionary theory that we need?
I think I give up is actually quite a respectable response, because it is astounding how complicated life is and how beautiful it is, how diverse it is, and how it looks designed. And so I could well imagine people saying, I give up. However, to say it must have been created, I mean, that's just illogical, because it's no more easy to explain the origin of a creator than it is to explain the origin of the complexity of life itself. It's a total and complete non-explanation. So before Darwin came along, it would have been perfectly respectable to say, I give up. it's incredibly complicated. There must be an explanation, but I can't think of it. And then Darwin came along and did think of it. But to say, therefore, it must have been designed is a total and complete cop-out. It doesn't explain anything.
It's actually contradictory. If you say, I give up, it must have been designed, then you haven't given up.
Yeah.
You've offered an explanation.
Exactly.
And you don't even care if it's true.
Exactly. So you asked me, what can we do to teach it? Well, you can write lots of books, as I've done. But then, of course, they've got to read them, and which is more of a problem. You can do television, I suppose. I've done a bit of that as well. It is very difficult to get across. I mean, one of the problems is the sheer time involved. Nobody can grasp the immensity of time that geology allows, in which evolution has happened. It is absolutely colossal. And so all our intuitions about the rate at which evolution might go let us down. We can't really understand how you could go from one species to another, let alone from a microbe to mammalian life. So getting across the sheer time scale is one thing. And there are various analogies, you're probably familiar with them, lots of them. One that I rather like is the one where you stretch your arm out. I didn't invent this, somebody else did. And you say the middle of your throat, the middle of my tie here, is the origin of life. And the tip of my finger is the present. And the time involved, you've got, the dinosaurs didn't come until about there. So way near the present. The Homo sapiens arrived at about my fingernail there. And the whole of human history, the whole of recorded history, the Egyptians and the Babylonians and the Persians and the Jews and the Greeks and the Romans, and all of human recorded history flies away in the dust from one stroke of the nail file. So we're accustomed to thinking of human history as long. We think in the mists of time back to the ancient Greeks, back to the ancient Egyptians. We think so long ago. It's nothing. It's just, as somebody else said, it's just before the stroke of midnight on the clock face of the geological time.
Yeah, there's a couple difficulties there. Not only our inability to properly grasp the timescales, but also our ego and our sense of self-importance, and how it seems strange that everything we know about humans could vanish in that analogous stroke of a nail.
I mean, another analogy, I think, I can't remember, it might have been Mark Twain who suggested the layer of paint on top of the Eiffel Tower. That's humanity. But the timescale involved is one thing. Another point you have to get across is that it is not chance. There are an awful lot of people who think they can simply dismiss evolution because it's the theory of chance. Well, any fool can see it can't possibly be a theory of chance. I mean, chance couldn't possibly give rise to the beauty, the elegance, the sheer designedness, the apparent designedness of living things. It cannot be that. The whole enterprise is to get away from random chance and to substitute something else. And Darwinian natural selection is the only substitute that has ever been proposed that could work.
The idea that maybe there's chance involved in when and how a mutation occurs, or there may be chance involved in which weather storm might separate someone. But in the broad scheme, this is physical law acting on matter, following, not prescribed by an intelligence, but following the natural order.
Yes, there has to be chance, of course, in mutation and the weather and things like that. But the driving force towards the illusion of design, the beauty of the design of an eye or a wing or a foot or a heart, and the diversity of life, the driving force is non-random natural selection.
Now, I always wanted to ask you, there are people who grasp things more clearly at different ages. And I know young kids who are thrilled to learn good science and are fascinated with dinosaurs. And Darwinian natural selection just makes sense to them. It's like the first time you hear it, it's, well, of course that's the case. For others, it seems to be a little more difficult. either based on their upbringing, I don't know what all the factors might be. But when you see a fish that is demonstrating amphibian-like qualities, it's coming up onto land and it has flippers that are close to fin, there are people, or close to feet, there are people who would look at that and say, wow, I get it. I get how this...
Yeah.
And there are others, like one of my wife's relatives, looked at an example of that. One of my relatives would do this too, so I'm not just beating up on her family. But she looked at this and she said, isn't it wonderful what God can create?
Yeah. Those fish are lovely because they're doing much more recently. They've re-evolved what our ancient ancestors did in the Devonian era. And so they come out of the water, they walk around, they jump, they even climb trees. It's wonderful to see these fish. They have various names like frogfish and things like that.
But I always just presume that you, as a young boy, just immediately got this.
No, I didn't. I think it was my father who first explained natural selection to me, and I understood it, but I didn't think it was a big enough theory to account for the elegance of life. It was only later that I apprehended that.
And it's going to be a different answer for everybody, but do you know what it was that made the change in you from, okay, that's interesting, I don't quite get it, to, oh my gosh, this is a profound statement that people aren't grasping?
I don't remember that, but it is a profound statement, and it has to be in a way because it took so long for humanity to get it. I mean, it took till the middle of the 19th century, and I've always been baffled by why, in a way, people like Newton and Hume and Aristotle didn't get it, because it is actually a very simple idea. It's not like relativity or quantum theory. It's not profoundly difficult, but it's, I suppose, profoundly counterintuitive. I think, as you've suggested, Matt, it's kind of, you almost can't believe that something so complicated and beautiful as life could possibly come into being by such a simple idea as the non-random survival of random variation. So I think that may be why it took until the middle of the 19th century for Darwin and Wallace independently to get it. And I expect they had resistance to it when they first thought of it.
And how fortunate are we that it's become sufficiently understood that now school children can, grasp this and have a good understanding of it. I think one of the reasons it seems so strange to me, I agree with you, that it seems like someone should have thought of this earlier, because we had domesticated animals, we domesticated crops,
yes.
We had been doing the things that nature does.
Exactly, and this was one of the main points Darwin made. Darwin used domesticated animals as his sort of introductory argument. He said, look at how powerful selection is, look at how we've managed to change rock doves into all the various breeds of pigeons, look how we managed to change flowers, wild roses into domestic roses. Wolves have become dogs of all these different breeds that are totally unlike wolves, and yet they've been transformed from the wolf in just a matter of centuries. So what Darwin did was say, look what can be done by artificial selection. Now all you need do is that mental flip that says, you don't need a breeder, you don't need a human breeder to come along and choose the dogs to breed from. Nature will do that for you. So the power of artificial selection is harnessed in a slightly different way by nature, and nature is the breeder that produces all of life.
There's a confusing array of creationist models. There are the people who think that the world was created in 7 literal days and that these represent ages. I can understand the people who, I don't understand why they think the Earth is 6,000 to 10,000 years old now. That's an untenable position. But if that's what they believe, I can understand why understanding evolution would be more difficult for them, because they don't even accept that time is there. But I'm more baffled by the apologists and creationists who think, oh, of course, the universe is 13.7 billion years old, the Earth's 4.5 billion, but that's still not enough time when we have the evidence.
Yeah, there are people like that. There was a nice story told by J.B.S. Haldane, the great British geneticist, one of the founders of the neo-Darwinian synthesis. And after a lecture, a lady stood up and asked him a question and put exactly this point. She said, Professor Haldane, I simply can't believe that there's been enough time, even given billions of years, to go from a single-celled ancestor to something like me, a multicellular creature, trillions of cells with the heart and lungs and brain and kidneys and bones and things. Just doesn't make sense. Madam, you did it yourself, and it only took you 9 months. To which, of course, she could have retorted, yes, but that in that 9 months the process was supervised by DNA, or she would have called it genes in those days. And that, of course, is correct. And what evolution does, what natural selection does, is to choose those genes that supervise the embryological process that does that amazing trick in 9 months.
So in this process, one of the key aspects that we come up against is transitional forms, and people have different views of what that means. So a creationist might say, oh, you haven't found any transitional forms, or you haven't found a missing link. And for years, when I'm asked this question on the show, well, first of all, I point out that that you're calling into the atheist experience, and I'm not a biologist, and if you maybe you're talking to the wrong guy about this. But I had always responded that everything is a transitional form, that all of us are a transition between our ancestors and our progeny. And this, I don't know that this has the impact on others that it had on me, because they seem to be looking at it backwards. Backwards, it's a little easier to say, oh, this is clearly a transition.
Yes, I mean, everything is potentially a transition. Not everything actually is, but potentially it is. Michael Shermer makes rather a nice point, which is that when there's a gap in the fossil record, which there is in quite a number of places, because fossilizing is quite a rare event, so that we have this gap, and they say, there's a gap. And then somebody finds a fossil right in the middle of the gap, which is a transitional form. Now we've got 2 gaps.
And then they told 2 friends, and they told 2 friends, and so on. It's interesting to me that so much emphasis, I think, as people were battling against this idea in the modern era, because we're trying to teach it in schools, and of course there are religious people objecting, this idea of a missing link kept coming up.
Well, the missing link was in Victorian times. That meant the missing link between apes and humans, and there were no fossils, no hominid fossils in Darwin's time. Darwin looked at the modern anatomy of chimpanzees and gorillas and correctly inferred that we are African apes, that we evolved in Africa. And since that time, of course, there have been lots and lots of fossils discovered in South Africa, in East Africa, and even North Africa. So we have lots and lots of links. They're not missing anymore. They're missing on the chimpanzee side of the divide, because you have a common ancestor which lived about 6 million years ago, and then it branched and went down one side towards chimpanzees and bonobos, which branched again there, and then the other side went down to humans. And we've got plenty of fossils down the human line, so there's no dearth of links there. They're no longer missing. There aren't any fossils down the chimpanzee line, and that's regrettable. It may be because they're forest dwellers and it's more difficult to fossilize in forest conditions. But there are plenty of missing links, no longer missing.
But you can't know, you weren't there.
Yeah. Yes. How do you deal with that kind of thing? Yes, of course. And one analogy that I like to use to that is to say a detective comes upon the scene of a crime after it's been committed, more or less by definition, and works out what happened. Sherlock Holmes, Hercule Poirot, they look at fingerprints, they look at footprints, they look at all the cues that are available around. There's a window open or the window closed or whatever it might be, and you work out what happened by looking at the clues. That's sort of what we do. But the difference is, whereas Sherlock Holmes or Hercule Poirot had a limited number of clues, we have millions and millions and millions of clues. We have fossils, we have the geographical distribution of animals and plants on islands and continents of the world. They're distributed in exactly the places they should be distributed if evolution had taken place. We look at fossils, we look at molecular, comparative molecular sequencing. You can sequence the DNA or the proteins of any creature you like, animal or plant, and you can find genes that are clearly the same gene, but with differences in the details. And so you can literally count the number of discrepancies between a human and a possum, or a human and a beetle. It doesn't matter what it is. You can find a gene where it's obviously the same gene, and you can literally count the number of letter discrepancies between them. And you plot it all out, and you find a beautiful hierarchical tree, a beautiful pedigree. It's got to be a pedigree. And so that's what you can do with molecular data. That's sort of what Darwin himself was able to do with bones and comparative anatomy. And that's persuasive enough, goodness knows. But with molecules, it's even more persuasive. So you don't have to have been there. I mean, the evidence is just mountainously high.
I think this ties back a lot into different views of knowledge, where when it's convenient, they would like there to be certainty. And I'm always happy to point out that they believe in Jesus, and they weren't there when he was crucified as well. So clearly, we can infer some things and come to reasonable conclusions. When we talk about science, it's a couple of the beautiful things about science is that it's self-correcting, and yet the creationists will just constantly point to, oh, here's an anomaly, here's an error, here's a mistake, here's a hoax, as if they could disprove evolution and all of a sudden their creation model wins. And to me, it was, even if we found out tomorrow that everything we understood about natural selection were wrong, that still wouldn't lend any credence to it.
That's right. No, I mean, you have two hypotheses, A and B, and A has a lot going for it, and B has nothing whatever going for it. So, and then you find a single slight discrepancy. Something went wrong with A, as you say, a hoax, Piltdown man, whatever it is. Right, that's it for A. Must be B. And that's the level of logic we have to deal with.
Oh, you have an alibi. Oh, the butler did it then. Yes, we're done.
Exactly, yes, exactly.
So one of the aspects of this is that we have a model that is testable and a model that makes predictions. For example, we predicted, based on all of our understanding, where to go dig in order to find something like Tiktaalik. What, and this is, you can feel free to make a face and scoff because it's what I did when I thought of the question. What would creationists have to do, potentially, to turn their proposition into a testable claim at all?
I cannot think of what they could do, unfortunately. It would be nice if can you think of anything? I mean,
no, that's...
Yeah.
I'm asking you.
I mean, they can up the ante on finding difficulties for evolution. I mean, Darwin wrote a chapter in The Origin of Species called Organs of Extreme Complexity, and he took things like the eye and the heart, and he showed how, although on the face of it, it seems almost too difficult to explain, nevertheless you can explain it. You don't actually need to. I mean, if somebody comes to me and says, I bet you can't explain the elbow joint of the lesser spotted weasel frog. And I'd say, well, actually, I've never heard of the lesser spotted weasel frog, and so I can't explain it. Right, that's it. You can't explain it. God must have done it. The proper answer is no. I don't know how to explain that, but let's do a bit of research on it. Let's go to work on it. Let's examine. Let's go and find some weasel frogs and examine them and dissect them and see how they behave, and we'll see if we can do it. But even if we fail, that doesn't mean that the alternative theory B is the right one. It could be that we just aren't clever enough to think of the alternative. I've satirized the argument as the argument from personal incredulity. You say, I can't understand how this could have happened, therefore God must have done it. But that's the negative thing. That's trying to find flaws in evolution. You've asked me what testable hypothesis could they put forward? What experiment could they do, say? I used to think that something like God coming down out of the clouds and bellowing in a great, loud Paul Robeson voice, "I created everything." That would be moderately convincing, but I still... I still would actually fall back on Hume on miracles and say, isn't it actually more probable that I'm hallucinating or being hoaxed by some clever conjurer like that? Perhaps an alien conjurer from outer space.
Yeah. This is, technology sufficiently advanced is indistinguishable from magic. How the hell can I tell the difference?
Yeah.
This is why I changed the answer I gave about what would change my mind to I have no idea.
Yes, quite.
But if there is a God, he knows, and he hasn't done it, so
Yeah.
the hell with him. But the God voice, maybe if he just said, "I created the platypus," because that's a confusing creature for many people.
Well, when the first platypus was sent to London for examination, it was thought to be a hoax. It was thought to be somebody had stitched together a duck's bill and a
P.T. Barnum created the platypus right
Yeah.
after the Fiji mermaid.
yeah.
I'm going to shift topics just a little bit because we talked before about the world we're living in, about the information that people get and how it is almost being curated for them by social media, that you get spoon-fed things. But I want to touch on a different aspect of this, and that is reaching conclusions based on headlines only.
Oh, yeah.
Have you seen what... Not only do we live in a world where headlines are already sensationalized to draw your attention, but I find over and over again, people will read the headline and not the article, not the content, certainly not any references, and just broadcast on social media.
They do, that's right, and I think this is one of the reasons why science has a problem, a public relations problem, because so often a headline will appear in a tabloid newspaper which will say something like, "X causes cancer, scientists show." And then next week, the same X cures cancer, scientists show. And so the headlines obviously contradict each other, but the details may not. It could be that X both causes and cures cancer. Maybe it has a U-shaped dose-response curve, so that if you're plotting the effect of the amount of X there and the effect on cancer there, there's a U-shaped curve, and if you're on that part of the U, it has a positive effect on cancer. That part of the curve, it has a negative effect, and so it does both cause and cure. The contradictory headlines, though, will lead people to say, "Oh, well, scientists just contradict themselves, so we can't believe science anymore." And that's very sad. And I think that, obviously, journalists bear some blame for that, but also scientists who not publish, but announce their results prematurely and in a sort of half-baked way, so that it's almost meat and drink to journalists wishing to pick up the story. So I think that is a serious problem, and scientists need to think about how to handle that.
I think there's so much concern that people don't value science and people aren't sufficiently science educated that some scientists are like, "Oh, we need to get this out here and let's do it in a way that's exciting." So I've seen headlines that science has proved that we are living in a simulation, and then recently that we are not living in a simulation. And if you actually dig in on what the papers say, they say neither of those. That just this week, even a day or so ago, getting outside the realm of science, I saw a headline that was, "Pope allows debates on married priests." And people read the headline and their immediate assumption is, oh, the Catholic Church, maybe they're coming around and they're going to allow priests to marry. And that has absolutely nothing to do with what was being discussed. This has happened several times before, that the Episcopalian priests who were married, the Catholic Church would like to lure them in to be priests and allow them to stay married. They just can't have sex anymore.
Not with women anyway.
Yeah, depending on how long you've been married, maybe it's not a problem. I don't know. But this is a marketing strategy. This is, hey, the Catholic Church is losing out to Protestants in the Amazon region. We're not really going to change Catholicism, but we'll change parts of Catholicism in the Amazon region just so that we can reach more people.
Yeah. Yeah, you're right. Yeah.
But they're not coming around. They're not coming around on sex at all.
No, so the headline is misleading. Quite right. Yes.
I wish they would come around on sex.
Yes.
That's not just funny. I find it bizarre that this one particular church has perhaps more sexual hang-ups than any other. You know, they're going to prohibit the very thing that one would argue perhaps makes us human, the desires that we have, the interaction, the stuff that has produced who we are. Nope, can't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
While they hide rapists.
Yeah.
I think they have a duty to do better, but
Yeah.
sermon over for this. Something happened today that we spoke about briefly. I found out the news, and we don't have a lot of information, but there were a couple of questions that I had where I wanted to get your perspective. For those who aren't aware, just outside of San Antonio today, in a small town, someone pulled out an automatic weapon and killed 27 people in a Baptist church, the First Baptist Church of this town. We don't yet know what the motivation is. The individual who did this was killed. Hypothetically, if we were to discover that this was some prominent member of a local atheist community who had decided to target a church, how would you respond to this shooting?
These things are so appalling. I don't think I want to get into hypotheticals like that. I think we don't know what happened. And my immediate reaction is to be obviously horrified and to feel this person is surely going to be insane, and every country has its lunatics, and the difference is that in the United States there are so many guns around that lunatics can get hold of guns. And so I almost don't want to ask what the motive is, because I don't think such an appalling act has a thing you could call a motive anyway. This is just a nut who has managed to get hold of a gun, and it's going to go on and on happening as long as guns are so readily available in the United States. And so I think the only lesson I would wish to draw from it is, for goodness sake, United States, sort out your gun problem.
And I certainly echo a great deal of the sentiment there. The reason I was kind of hoping to get to a hypothetical is because invariably we don't tend to find that this is the case. And there's everything inside of me wants to say, oh yeah, that's such an unlikely possibility that we just shouldn't even bother with it. But I would like to think that the broader secular humanist community would very quickly and easily just denounce all forms of violence and violence threats along these lines, to show that we're in a different headspace than, for example, if it was a rival church or something along those lines. You may be correct about whether or not he was, or what his mental capabilities were, but the reason it struck me was I had a debate with the debate that we spoke about the other night. The preacher who knows nothing about evolution was talking about banging sticks and rocks together to get puppies. And he's reported that since the debate's been posted, he's received threats of death threats and violence threats. And I immediately posted on Facebook a statement saying that, if it's anybody who's a fan or a follower of mine, go the fuck away. You are part of the problem. I don't need you. I don't want you advocating for violence and other stuff. I'm not sure I believe his claim, but I wanted to make a distinction between how we are going to respond to violent acts, because there's nothing within atheism or secularism there's no ideology that would encourage someone to.
No, of course not. I mean, that's absolutely right. And if it was a follower of ISIS, then we could say he probably isn't insane. I mean, if it was a follower of ISIS doing something like this, then it's done because he thinks it's the righteous thing to do. He thinks he's doing the will of his God. He thinks he's going to earn a place in heaven, in paradise, because he has slain some infidels and gone to a martyr's heaven or whatever it is. So there is a perfectly logical progression going from certain kinds of religious belief to these horrible acts of mass murder. There simply is not a logical progression that goes from atheism to doing any such thing. And so if it incidentally happened to be somebody whose philosophical position, insofar as such a person could have a philosophical position, was atheism, it would be utterly irrelevant. This would just be a sick individual who has a gun. So that, although it's possible to formulate a logical progression from religious belief of a certain kind to violent murder, there is no logical progression that goes from atheism to violent murder. How could there be?
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
I've got one more question topic I want to hit real quick. So for those of you who had questions, if you can quietly, without disturbing people, start moving out to there. We'll get to questions pretty soon. But I've heard that you're working on another book. And I know that everybody here will want to hear about it.
Okay. I've started work on a book which my tentative title is Atheism For Children. No. I rather suspect that it may not end up with that title. It will be that content, but it may not be that title. The word children is a problem because many children prefer not to be called children, especially as this is actually aimed at kind of 12, 13, 14-year-olds, so it's more like atheism for young adults, atheism for teenagers. I don't want it to sound as though it's indoctrinating, which would be another reason not to call it that. Another suggestion that I've had made to me is, Mum, I think I'm an atheist. Anyway, I've written about 5 chapters in a very tentative draft, and the first one is about how many, many gods there are, and so it's not clear why the particular god that the child has been brought up in is the right one. And then there's quite a lot on evolution, because I think that's one of them. I mean, the lure of creationism is quite strong. There's one on the good book and how utterly appalling it actually is, how dreadful. I've said before that the God of the Old Testament is the most unpleasant character in all fiction. And so it documents that. I plan a chapter on miracles, perhaps a chapter on prayer, a chapter on why we don't need God to be good. And it'll be illustrated. It'll be rather along the same lines as the children's book I wrote a few years ago called The Magic of Reality. It'll be the same style as that, but more of a kind of young person's version of the God Delusion.
And it wasn't clear about this, and I will catch heat for this later. So the microphones are set up. We want people to line up on the outside so we're not blocking anybody's view, and then one at a time we'll have you walk up to either microphone. I'm assuming that the chapter on miracles is a look into miraculous claims and not just like a list of actual miracles, because that would be a very short chapter.
Yes. Sure, yes.
Perhaps just, miracles, and then just say none known, next chapter.
That'd be good, yeah.
I find that I find that interesting, both the topic and the target, and I'm glad that you pointed out that this is something very different from indoctrination. This is about giving material to people who are coming of age and realizing they don't believe the things that other people believe or that they've been taught. I recall I was a believer for way too many years. Almost embarrassing how long it took me to figure this shit out. But everybody finds it in their own time, and so I keep running across young people, teenagers,
Yeah.
and they're facing, hey, how do I tell my family, or should I tell my family, and how do I deal with my family? Should I do a big coming out thing, or should this be more organic? And I'm always just impressed that they've put way more thought into this at an earlier age than I ever did. I was so busy focusing on what the church wanted me to do and being in an insulated environment where, I'd never heard of Thomas Paine. I didn't know that much about, the science you were taught in school, sure, but beyond that, I'm just impressed at the way the world is changing thanks to you, thanks to the various media outlets, thanks to the internet, where I don't know if we have more young atheists than ever, but it certainly feels that way.
Well, I think we do in America and in Western Europe. I wish I could say the same of the Islamic world. I think things are even moving in the right direction there. I'm rather fond of quoting the fact that there's a bootleg copy of the God Delusion in Arabic, which for which I get no royalties. And it's downloadable as a PDF. And what's rather nice is that it has been downloaded 13 million times.
I think if it's downloaded 1 million more times, it will be as worn as a Grateful Dead concert recording. But can we have the house lights up just a little bit so we can maybe see the folks on the microphones a little bit? We'll start on this side. Whoever's at the front, come on over, state your name if you're comfortable with that, and ask your question.
Okay, it works.
It works.
Oh, yeah. Hi, Professor Richard. Just because you just mentioned about the God Delusion in Arabic, I was living in the Middle East, and my friend got a copy of the God Delusion. His name was Muhammad, and he was one of the biggest reasons why I'm atheist today. And it's just phenomenal to just believe how your impact just would reach all the way to the other side of the world with your book.
Which country is that?
Well, we live in Qatar, so
I'm going to Qatar in a couple of months' time.
Oh.
Yeah.
I was wishing to get a copy of your signing the God Delusion to bring it to him.
So you have a friend called Mohammed, and he told... I didn't quite get the full story.
So my friend, his name is Muhammad, and he read the book called God Delusion, and basically from that book he got basically it was the basis for him to convert to atheism.
Yeah.
And it was big influence on my ideas.
Did he read it in English or Arabic?
I believe he read it in English, actually.
Okay. Well, that's very good to hear. Thank you very much.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a question. I know
Yes,
you
please,
said
go
a
ahead.
paragraph in the beginning.
Yeah.
I'm about to hang up, but you're so nice. Just go ahead and do the question.
I guess I've asked Sir Sam Harris in the previous event about free will, because I don't believe in free will and he doesn't believe in it either, and it sort of puts me in a place where I feel like depressed about life in a way that I feel like I don't have control over my ability to change my life, because my genetics are sort of determines everything that is gonna happen to my life. So it feels like there's little to do with how much I can change about my life if my IQ is constant and my genetics are also sort of.
So what's your question?
My question is, I guess I'm questioning how, I guess, your views on free will and how genetics affect people's ability to sort of control their life.
I hate the free will question. I usually resort to Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question, do you have free will? Christopher Hitchens' answer to the question, do you have free will? I have no choice. I don't think you should feel distressed about it. I mean, I think that probably the consensus of scientists today would be yes, everything we do is determined. No need to drag genes in, by the way. I mean, that genes are no more deterministic than anything else. I mean, just any sort of antecedent physical cause may determine, does determine what you do. But the illusion of free will is so powerful that you live your life as though you have free will. We all do. So cheer up.
And I will, I'll throw in a quick addendum that I am a compatibilist a la Dennett, and Sam Harris and I were arguing free will the other night, and I'm sure we will again. And when we come to some sort of agreement that I think will benefit other people, maybe he'll share that. Yes, sir.
Hi, Professor Dawkins. Thank you for a lifetime of everything. I just want you to complete the punchline to my favorite joke ever. Are you ready? Why are there so many old people in church?
You've read my quotation. It was an Australian friend who asked this question: why are there so many old people in church? And his answer was, cramming for the final.
Oh, that wasn't the question?
No.
You're cheating.
This has been 11, so he took forever. I'm going to be real quick. This has been 11, and I really want to start a bit of a fight. I've seen you on your atheist experience, aren't really convinced in the design of evolution, that a polar bear is designed for its niche in that environment. I've seen you argue against that.
Sorry, who are you talking to?
An atheist, to Matt, and I want you to convince him that design is real.
I have no idea what you're talking about.
I've seen you hang up on people, say it's not designed, it's not, and...
No, it's not designed. If by design you are talking about an intentional going forward with a purpose.
It doesn't have to be intentional. It can be designed.
This is
design
semantic.
is intentional. No. Here's the thing. This is really easy. Design is intentional. The appearance of design need not be.
Do you agree with that, Richard?
Well, I think what you're thinking of is that Dan Dennett has redefined the word design to include unconscious design. And so it's just semantics. You can define design as being deliberate, intentional design, or you can define design as looking as though it's been designed in that sense, beautifully arranged so that everything works. Dennett's definition is that, and he wants us to all change our usage, our meaning of the word design. And that is a semantic thing. Words are our servants, not our master.
Yeah, we just don't disagree on this at all. And we don't disagree on the fact that we don't need to be prescriptivists with language as long as we're communicating a topic. Yes, from this side, please.
Hello. Thank you both for coming. And out.
Yeah.
Crowd. My question is regarding several days ago we had festivities for Halloween. My friend went as Gaddafi. And I thought that was pretty scary, but the scariest thing in my opinion is alienation in society, best described with the scream of Edward Munch. And I ask you, Richard and Matt, to comment on whether as scientists we are alienating ourselves. I mean, my family is more concerned with whether I earn a living than whether I fulfill my happiness of botany. And Pythagoras was in a ancient civilization where they were looked at as elite and away from and separate from and distinct from society. And I believe that when I introduce myself, describe what I do, I like to introduce myself as a naturalist. I study nature. That's what I'm passionate about. And by describing myself as a scientist, I believe I alienate myself from them because they don't understand what a scientist really is.
It's not sexy and lauded the way it used to be, is kind of what you're saying.
Yeah.
Well, that's their problem. I mean, you're doing the right thing.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a question for Professor Dawkins. You have an amazing video that's on YouTube that's been around for decades, I imagine. It's about how the eye has been able to evolve. And until I've seen that video, I did not comprehend how it's possible for that to happen. And I understand now how the eye could evolve. But now I have another question regards metamorphosis. That seems like such an unbelievable type of process for an egg to form into a caterpillar. That caterpillar wraps itself up in a cocoon, liquefies, and comes out like a beautiful angel with wings. Can you give us any kind of insight into how evolution can have done that?
Ladies and gentlemen, the argument from personal incredulity. The lesser spotted weasel frog.
Which, by the way, you just made up that name, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
There's no...
I was going to go back to my amphibian.
Okay, I mean, it is a very, very beautiful problem. Thank you for bringing it up. I mean, a caterpillar and a butterfly are two totally different kinds of animal, but they have the same genome, and one turns into the other. And as you say, I mean, the caterpillar feeds on plants, and it's an eating machine. It's a machine for building up the sheer amount of goods, the amount of stuff in the caterpillar. And then the caterpillar more or less dissolves internally and uses the material that is built up in all this eating of plants, uses the material to build a butterfly or a moth, which is purely almost entirely a nectar feeding machine, and the nectar is just aviation fuel. It's a winged carrier of gametes, of sperms or eggs. And so it's the reproductive phase. And as you say, it is a very strange thing that's happened, that natural selection could favor, using the same genome, two entirely different ways of life. A vegetarian feeding machine, and then an aerial nectar-eating reproduction machine. It's happened. Natural selection works on the same genes or different genes to produce these two different ways of life. I don't think I can do anything really to dispel your natural incredulity. I prefer to call it wonder. It is wonderful, and it's a very extreme example, and I love it. I mean, but I don't think I can really answer your incredulity. Yeah.
I've always kind of wondered about that as well. You know, nature's found a number of different solutions to different problems, and when you look at the egg to larva, is it that is that process with the chrysalis and the butterfly, is it really that much different than other methods, or are we seeing a strange line where the early stage actually does some function and the later stage doesn't?
Yes, I mean, it's less extreme in other creatures where the animal, I mean, you have to grow from an egg to an adult, and so you go through a number of stages. The thing that's special about caterpillars is that they go out into the world and they live a life as a vegetarian. They do a completely different kind of ecology from the... They behave like an adult.
So it'd be different from... far different from maggots to flies, even
Well,
though they're in the world.
not that different, actually, but a kind of more extreme, I suppose. I mean, there are some rather remarkable... Axolotl is a good example, where the larval stage... I mean, as you know, tadpoles have a different way of life from frogs, and in axolotls, the tadpole stage has its own way of life, and then it becomes reproductively mature as a tadpole, and never reaches the adult stage at all, the adult salamander stage at all. And Julian Huxley brilliantly took axolotls and injected thyroid hormone in them, and managed to turn them into the salamander that nobody had ever seen. So that what happened in evolution is it used to be a tadpole which had a different way of life from the adult salamander, and then it developed sexual maturity at the tadpole stage, and simply cut off the end of the life history. There was a rather popular theory by a man called Garstang, and it may still be right, that we ourselves did that in our ancient ancestry. We are related, as you may know, to sea squirts, to tunicates. Tunicates sit on the ocean floor, and they're just sort of bags of seawater that they filter seawater. But the larva of a tunicate looks like a tadpole. And Garstang's theory was that we are descended from the larvae of tunicates, and we've cut off the sessile, sitting on the bottom of the sea, doing nothing stage of our life history.
Now we sit on the couch.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
Evening, Professor Dawkins and Matt. Thanks so much for a terrific discussion.
Thank you.
I'm going to caveat this question by saying that perhaps I haven't been as attentive to your remarks on this topic as I might have been, so forgive me if it's a bit of a redundant question. But your arguments against the attacks on science from the so-called religious right are pretty well documented. But the sort of dual assault from the left, both from Islam and also the identitarian left, so the blank slatists, the gender is a social construct types. My question is, A, did you anticipate that attack coming? And B, how do we challenge it?
Well, I don't think I would make any... Yeah, it's difficult. I find the whole left-right continuum thing problematic anyway, but you're absolutely right that there is an attack on science from people who are often called left, often intellectuals in non-scientific subjects who take the view that perhaps something like opinion is more important than evidence. We're all entitled to our opinions. Everything's a social construct. Even science is a social construct. Scientists claim to be objective and to study evidence objectively and logically, but actually they're pushing some kind of political agenda. I think it is pernicious. I believe strongly in objective truth. I believe that we need to study truth and understand truth and work out what the facts of the universe are. One reason is simply that it's useful. You build planes and cars and ships and spaceships and things on scientific principles. They work. Science works. But also science is beautiful. It's actually wonderful. It's elegant, fascinating to immerse yourself in what we so far know and to work on what we don't yet know, which is also very exciting. It's an entirely worthwhile form of life, and I deplore tendencies to denigrate science and somehow make it subordinate to what I see as rather petty human concerns.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for being here, Professor Dawkins. Do you think that because of, for example, the abundance of certain elements in the universe and the characteristics of certain elements and the laws of physics and biochemistry, etc., if we were to find life on another planet, that it would be quite similar to life on Earth? Or do you think it could be quite different? Do you think it necessarily needs to be carbon-based? Do you think water is important to life? Do you think if life evolved on another planet, that it would be based on natural selection?
Yes, I'm fascinated by this question. I've talked to chemists about it, and the consensus seems to be, yes, it's got to be carbon. Whatever else, carbon seems to be the only element which has the necessary capacity to form these macromolecules and things that you need. So I think it's got to be carbon. The other extreme, you might say, has it got to be really similar to us? Will there be legs and eyes and wings and brains and things like that? And that's much more problematical. We do have a certain amount of very indirect evidence from life on this planet, because we see convergent evolution on this planet. We see, starting from different beginnings, lineages of evolution converging on the same endpoint. You see this spectacularly in the mammal fauna of Australia, for example. When the dinosaurs went extinct 65 million years ago, the mammals after a while took over. But they took over separately in various continents of the world, in Australia, in South America, in Africa, and in Eurasia, and also islands like Madagascar. The parallels that you see in these different places suggest that evolution has considerable power to push lineages in the same direction. So in Australia you have marsupial, they're all marsupials. You have marsupial flying squirrels, marsupial wolves, the Tasmanian wolf, marsupial rabbits, marsupial mice, marsupial moles. In South America, there was a similar radiation of mammals where you get convergence. And this suggests that natural selection is powerful enough to make things happen in similar ways. But on another planet, however, and you can also make an argument like something like an eye is such a useful thing to have. On any planet which has light, well, it's pretty much got to have light, there's got to be a source of energy, but where there's not a sort of thick fog, where light can travel in straight lines, then you're probably going to get eyes, and eyes have evolved so many times on this planet independently. So I think you could predict that kind of thing. But the conditions on other planets are going to be so different. A gravitational field can be much weaker or much stronger, and we already know from the laws of physics, you can predict that in a planet that has a much weaker gravitational field, the whole fabric of skeletons is going to be different. You'll have large animals built like spiders with long, thin legs. On a planet with a much stronger gravitational field, you could have mouse-sized animals built like a rhinoceros with huge, great tree trunk, well, not huge, but I mean thick tree trunk limbs. You can do a fair bit by applying knowledge of physics to predict the kind of differences that you might expect to find on different planets. As for wildly different biochemistries, I've always wanted to persuade a biochemist to come up with a completely different hypothetical biochemistry. Do we have to have DNA? Probably not. Do we have to have protein? Possibly yes, because protein has this extraordinary capacity to be catalytic for an enormous variety of chemical reactions based upon its capacity to fold itself up into three-dimensional forms which determine its catalytic properties. So I think my prediction would be probably yes to protein, probably no to DNA, but definitely yes, I think, to something equivalent to DNA. A digital genetic system, digital because it has to be very accurate. Probably one-dimensional, it could be two-dimensional, a two-dimensional matrix rather than a one-dimensional string. Unlikely to be a three-dimensional gene because three-dimensional gene cannot be easily read. You can make sort of inferences like this. Would there be sex? No particular reason to think that, but it's worth talking about. Would there be nervous systems, something equivalent to a nervous system? It seems probable, but would it be neurons like we have? No reason to think so. I love this kind of speculation, but it obviously is speculation, but it can be informed speculation. Thank you very much for the question.
Thank you.
Hello. This is less about science or philosophy and more about you, Professor Dawkins. A while ago, you used to put the videos of the YouTuber Jacqueline Glenn on your website. Whatever really happened to that? You've recently stopped doing that.
Have I? I mean, it's not a conscious decision. I just don't happen to have become aware of them for some reason. So it's not a conscious decision. I think she's great.
All right, and also my most of my family is very Christian, very like Protestant, and I'm an atheist. I was wondering how I could, if you have any idea, like tips on how I could kind of let them down softly.
It's difficult, isn't it? I think I'm biased in favor of the full frontal approach, but I realize it's difficult, and it depends entirely on your relationship with your family, and which of course I don't know. But good luck with it anyway.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
Hi. First of all, thank you to both for coming out. You guys are huge role models. So my question is for Richard. So this is an issue that been intriguing me for the past year as a psychologist. Ever since Dr. Jordan Peterson refused to refer to students by their preferred gender pronouns. So my question, Professor Dawkins, in modern times, our university schools are teaching that gender is a social construct that's independent of biology, and that there can in fact be many different types of genders, pangender and agender, transgender, among many others. So as an evolutionary biologist, there's modernist.
Well, when I hear the word postmodern, I reach for my revolver. If somebody wishes to call themselves a different gender from their biological one, then that's their privilege, and I'm happy to go along with calling them that. It's a semantic issue whether they really are. I mean, you can define the sex of somebody by their chromosomes, by their genitals, by their those are the two main ways. Or you can define it by their preference, and so according to one definition, a person may be female. According to another definition, which would be the biological definition, they'd be male, or vice versa. So I don't get worked up about it.
So and I'll jump in for a minute on this, because this gets back to what we were talking about prescriptivism in language. And one of the things I push for is to make sure that we are honestly evaluating what somebody else has to say. So even the people who you may disagree with, or somebody may disagree with, who are talking about gender as a social construct, they have been pretty specific in the language that there's a distinction between gender identity, gender expression, and in no case are they denying the physical facts about biological sex. They are talking about the roles that we take in society, the language around it, the pronouns, the him, her thing, that is a construct of ours. It's not like language was handed down from a god. And so this idea that one can associate an identity with a gender construct, a norm in society, that men are this way and women are this way, which is, it's the pink and blue thing for boys and girls. Used to be reversed. And boys were pink and the girls were blue. The roles that we've developed, some of that is through the natural process of evolution, where you had the hunter-gatherers and you had the going out there and hunting, and certainly there are differences genetically and physiologically between genetic males and genetic females. But when they're talking about gender as a social construct, all they are saying is, I'm identifying with this particular role in society. I think the language is getting in the way, and the people who are equating sex and gender are being prescriptivist about language, and the people who are not equating those are saying, hey, we don't have a better way to talk about this yet, and we're working towards better ways to talk about it.
Thank you.
I have a question for both of you. I think, Matt, you've left out a little bit. Since both of you have been so enormously successful as popularizers of science, for those of us who'd like to
Well,
follow-
one of us has
Okay,
popularized science, not
you
me.
know where I'm going with this a little bit. Okay, so for those of us like myself who would like to follow in your footsteps, what advice would you have? And wouldn't mind talking about science writing in particular. I think I and a lot of other people would love to hear what you might have to say.
Oh, I hate the advice question. But since you ask about writing, I suppose I can try and say a little bit about that. Well, obviously, when you're writing about science or anything, you put yourself in the position of the reader, and that seems obviously enough, but many people don't. So, how could the reader misunderstand this? Read it through, looking at it from the point of view of a different person. How would she misunderstand that? How would he misunderstand that? What can I do to make it clearer? I can see an obvious way in which that could be mistaken, so I'll change that word there. Read it through often and often and often, imagining yourself to be a different person. I don't like dumbing down. I prefer to, I like quotation from Einstein, everything should be as simple as possible, but no simpler. So don't dumb down. I was once at a conference on science communication, and I was inveighing against dumbing down. And a man got up in the audience, as I thought with a sort of warm glow in his white male heart, and said, "Don't you think dumbing down is necessary to bring women and minorities to science?" So don't dumb down, and I would even take that to the point of, don't be afraid of using the perfect English word, even if it's not a very familiar one. Dictionaries exist, and don't be. I'm never afraid of driving my reader to the dictionary.
Thank you very much.
So I'll chime in with half a moment here for an answer. My answer is pretty much the same as his, only without the book writing portion. If you had any idea how much time I spend obsessing and toiling over, I want to evaluate an argument, I want to do it fairly. So for me, the keys that I give is not so much dumbing down. Make sure you understand things, ask lots of questions, but the biggest key is to actually give a shit about what kind of world you live in. I care about people's beliefs because they inform their actions. And when I found out that I was wrong about things, I wanted to find ways of helping other people who were potentially wrong. And if it turns out that I'm still wrong, I'm open to that being exposed as well. So if that's the same thing, whereas he's rereading it to find every way it could go wrong. This is the same thing I did, in software QA that I'm doing with logical arguments and debate. By the time I walk on a debate stage or step on the show, I have discussed this topic with myself and with several other people countless times, which is why I turn the show into a game to kind of see how quickly I can figure out where they're going. But yes.
I'm Mohammed Shaban. I think I tweet this time. Not sure if you remember me. But my question was, one of the major insights of Sir Isaac Newton was that the laws of physics could be generalized to celestial phenomena.
To what phenomena?
Celestial phenomena.
Celestial?
Yes.
Yes.
Sorry. I was wondering, when it comes to applying the same scenario to the laws of evolution and the laws of biology, many schools of thought and many thinkers, evolutionary biology thinkers, have pointed out the fact that there seems to be a lot of historical contingencies that kind of shape the pathways of evolution. For instance, if you go back to the Burgess Shale in British Columbia, and there's 25 different anatomical body plans. Out of those 25 different anatomical body plans, due to historical contingencies that have happened, only 4 have managed to survive, leave modern descendants, including the descendant of vertebrates. So I was wondering, if you actually, that kind of argument goes, if you actually rerun the evolution backwards and go back a million times forward, the the likelihood that they would give rise to humans would be null or zero.
What's the question?
Oh, so my question is,
Yeah.
do you think that kind of likelihood is kind of exaggerated in the sense that you wouldn't be able to generalize those solutions?
Yeah, it's very similar to the question that the woman asked earlier. The thought experiment of running evolution, starting from the beginning and then running it again and again, that was invented by Stuart Kauffman. It's a good thought experiment. He said, imagine you could rerun evolution 1,000 times. How many times would you expect to get this? How many times would you expect to get that? Sort of think statistically about the probability of getting the same. And the extreme question would be, as you say, would we get something like humans? There are those who say you would. There's a paleontologist, Simon Conway Morris, who's one of the people who's actually worked mainly on the Burgess Shale, which you refer to. Conway Morris believes that you would get humans. And he's very keen on convergent evolution, which I mentioned before. At least if not exactly humans, I mean upright walking bipeds with eyes looking forward and big brains and hands, that kind of thing. And he makes a good case, and I think you can make a good case for that. The whole poetry of the Burgess Shale, I think, has been exaggerated. I think Stephen Gould's book on it is actually a terrible book. He has this sort of, well, actually, his book is not so terrible as the people who've taken from it the wrong message. Sort of poetic message that in the Cambrian you had this sort of wild, frenzied dance of experimenting with new body plans, and since the Cambrian, the spring has dried up, and we no longer get new major phyla. You only get new lesser taxa. I've compared this argument to a gardener looking at a tree, an old tree, and saying, "Isn't it funny? This tree hasn't produced any new major big branches for years. All it produces is little twigs at the end." I mean, it's a silly argument. Of course you haven't produced any new major branches, because major branches happen a long time ago. That's the whole point about major branches. And so what happened in the Cambrian explosion was, of course, that there was the same kind of evolution that you get today, and some of the diversity that we see in the Cambrian has survived, and others of it hasn't. So I think the poetry of the Cambrian explosion and this sort of wild, frenzied dance of evolutionary experimentation with new phyla popping up every few minutes, I'm exaggerating, of course, is not helpful. It has misled a generation of people.
We've got about 8 minutes left. I'm going to try to get to some more questions fairly quickly. We'll do our best.
Okay. What's been lovely about this evening is hearing about your thoughts and doing some of that. But one of the things I'm particularly interested in is thinking about where you are now as a thinker and where you're going. And towards that end, my question is, what are the questions that are dominating your thoughts these days on any sphere, political, social, scientific, and what questions or thoughts are helping you to unpack?
Well, I've retired now. So I'm in a way, I'm looking at science from the sidelines. I would love to see somebody solve the riddle of the origin of life. That would be fascinating, because we don't really know anything about that yet. I find the progress of molecular genetics fascinating. It's quite extraordinary how genetics has become a branch of information technology, and how it's just like computers. I love it. I don't do it myself, but I'm fascinated by it. You ask about what are occupying my thoughts in the non-scientific field? I don't know that I can answer that. I mean, I could be terribly personal, but I'm damned if I'm going to.
Yes. From this side over here.
Thank you for coming here tonight, Mr. Dawkins. You continue to be an inspiration as a budding zoologist. And I was wondering, were there any questions in zoology or evolutionary biology that you had that you feel we've had a good or satisfactory answer to in your life?
Do you mean that I myself have
Well, the questions that you've had that you or others in the field have done work that has produced an answer that you were
well,
excited about.
I think there's, I mean, I won't speak about myself, but I think that there's great progress going on in the field of sexual selection, which hasn't been mentioned tonight. It's Darwin's other theory, and I think it's a very powerful idea to explain a great deal about life, not just peacocks and things like that, but possibly even humans. And I think it's an interesting idea that has been pushed mainly by Geoffrey Miller, that a lot of human evolution is driven by sexual selection. Darwin himself thought that, and Miller has brought it up to date. And I think the idea that, for example, the evolution of the human brain, which has been such a spectacular feature of human evolution in the last 2 or 3 million years, could the driving force have been sexual selection? Could it be that braininess is sexy, braininess is attractive? Both ways, by the way. Miller makes the point, it's pretty well got to be both ways. It's not like a peacock's tail, where the peacock that has the brilliant tail and the peahen doesn't. In the case of humans, the big brain is the same in both sexes, and so it's rather a nice thought that it might be that braininess is sexy, going both ways. So I think there's a lot of work going on in sexual selection, and I think, although I haven't been personally involved in it very much, I'd say that.
Yes. By the way, there's a soundbite there if anybody wants to grab it, where he had said "sexy" going both ways, just in case. Hey, Matt.
Hey, Matt. How's it going? I wanted to first thanks both for coming. Like that's my place to thank you. Anyway, I wanted to ask a question that's a little bit about evolution, a little bit about atheism, because that seems to sort of be split on stage. I can't help but get over the feeling that humans just carry this terrible evolutionary baggage that drives us towards religion. Not that it's impossible to get out, or that there's this God-shaped hole in people's hearts, but this idea that, humans on this savannah had to be afraid of a shadow because it might be a predator, basically hyperactive agency detect. I'm wondering, what are your thoughts on that? Is there really sort of an evolutionary force driving people to make the wrong decision all the time? And if so, how do you deal with that?
Well, I like I think the shadow theory is a good one. I think the idea that because what you don't understand, what you don't know, could be dangerous, and there's a kind of asymmetry that if you assume that it's not dangerous, then you get eaten. But so it's probably best to make the pessimistic assumption, and this generalizes to seeing agency wherever you look. So it's not enough just to see for the rain to come. There's an agent that sent it. The rain god sent it. The sun god, the rain god, the river god. And that seems to me to be plausible. That's not in itself a theory of the survival value of religion. For that, I think I prefer to think in terms of survival value of sort of psychological predispositions which might have led to religion. Are we driven to believe daft things? In a sense, I mean, I can see a case for that.
Well, Well, we know that getting to the wrong, having a wrong belief can lead to something beneficial, at least in the short term.
Yes, we know that. I mean,
and maybe in evolutionary time, religion, we're still in the short term.
I mean, we self-deceive. There's a lovely, Robert Trivers has written a book on self-deception, and there's psychological evidence that more than 50% of, everybody thinks they're in the top 50% of intelligence or driving ability or good looks which of course can't be true, and it's arguable that natural selection has built in a kind of optimism more than it should.
There's a partial answer to this that I talked about in the past, so I won't go through the whole thing again, where I said prayer works, in the sense that if you're trapped in a cave-in and you pray, your chances of getting rescued increase, not because there's a God there, but because the act of praying may calm you down, you use less oxygen, you extend the amount of time that you can be there. So that's what I mean about a wrong idea potentially having short-term benefits. I would like to think, though I can't in any way demonstrate that it's true, but having the correct belief would not only provide that benefit, but not for the short term, for the long term, understanding that calming down. I just don't necessarily know that psychologically knowing that if you're calm and breathe easy is enough to make you do it. I would hope so. Yeah.
Hey there. My question's about
what?
A subjective experience and an objective experience. No, a lot of our.
So you're talking extremely fast.
Sorry, a lot of our experiences are obviously subjective.
You're still talking extremely fast.
The way we observe, there's subjectivity to it. We don't see the entire truth of something. We only see parts of it because our senses are limited. Sometimes it seems that since there's so many different subjective viewpoints, that it's very difficult to ever find an objective truth, and potentially maybe impossible. I was just wondering your thoughts on that. Is empirical measurement, is it difficult given that all that we can experience is subjective?
But if that were right, wouldn't science not work? I mean, the fact is science works rather well, doesn't it?
The fact that you have a subjective experience or assessment of something doesn't change whether the something your experience is also can be evaluated objectively. This is why science relies on independent verification and repetition and these sorts of things, so that my view of truth is that truth is that which comports with reality. Now, you can fundamentally say, I have no way of ever knowing truth, and you can go down the road of hard solipsism, that I'm the only brain here, and you guys are figments of my imagination, which would make my imagination more impressive than anything I could have imagined.
Right.
But the denial of that the fact that we have subjective assessments does not mean that we cannot have a reasonable evaluation of what would be objectively real.
What about the sort of maybe potentially quantum physical?
But that's a second question, and we're almost out of time. And also, I'm not going down any quantum paths this evening. Yes.
Hi there. Thank you for both being here. With the centenary of the Russian Revolution, having that in context, my question is there a direct link between human incapacity to live without a God and the rise of a dictatorship that aims to exploit that need?
Is there a
rise of a dictatorship in a socialist society, post-revolutionary society?
What was the correlation again with?
That aims to exploit the need to live without a God in a secular society.
I just didn't get that at all.
Yeah, I'm not sure I follow the question either. Can you just do the question one more time?
So after the Bolsheviks came to power, one of the first tenets that they used, the separation of church and state, finally in Russia, and ended up what we know as the Soviet experience now. So my question is there a inherent need in human society to have a God? You cannot live without God.
Is there a need to have a God?
Yes.
Yeah, I see. I don't think there is. I'm not quite sure what the link is with the Russian Revolution. I certainly don't think there's a need to have a God, because plenty of us get along very well without one.
I wonder if the purpose of the question was, correct me if I'm not paraphrasing this, but because government institutionalized atheism went so poorly,
right? Yes.
Is it the case that we then need a God to not go so poorly?
And 140 million people going along.
No. The fact that, so what happened in Russia, there's nothing about atheism that necessarily leads to any conclusion. Basically, the Russians built a new religion of the leader and this opposition to organized religion. I would rather build a society based on reason, secular humanism. I don't see how secular humanism could lead to anything like the problems that we experience there.
So is socialism the new religion?
I don't need any religion, new or old, but
you could define a religion as something that a lot of people believe in, and in that sense, both socialism and Nazism could be called religions. Or you could define a religion as a belief in supernatural, in which case those are not. But certainly, both Stalin and Hitler cultivated a kind of religion in that they more or less, I mean, Hitler had grace said to him at the beginning of meals, and Stalin had people more or less praying to him. Oh, great Joseph Stalin, we bless you for this, that, and the other. And using more or less the cadences of the Lord's Prayer. So you can, once again, it comes down to what we've been talking about before, is the flexibility of language, and the fact that language is our servant, not our master. You can define a religion as an ideology that lots of people believe in and that they're prepared to die for and kill for, in which case both Nazism and socialism would count, and so would nationalism. Or you can define a religion as belief in the supernatural, in which case those are not.
Yeah. And my apologies. Thank you. This is going to be the
quick
last
question. Quick question, Professor Dawkins. What's your favorite Nightwish song?
What, he wanted to know your favorite Nightwish song, but yeah, we don't need it. Go ahead. Last question of the evening. Thank you for waiting.
Well, I've been working to fight air pollution and global warming as my career, and it seems to me that over the last decades there's been sort of steady progress in education and so forth, until maybe I'm misperceiving, but maybe the last 5 years it feels like things have started to go backwards in terms of what's happening in the US with EPA and regulations, or with what's happening in terms of, I guess, anti-science sentiment, like it was said on the left and on the right.
Certainly gone backwards in the last 10 months.
Oh, well, I was trying to avoid the political
I won't
color to
avoid.
my
I won't
question.
avoid it. Trump fucked the EPA.
Yeah, okay. Right, so, yes. So I guess since both of you have spent your careers fighting against the forces of unreason, how do you stay hopeful that will eventually prevail? Especially when you see numbers like growing religion worldwide, even though maybe in North America the trend is more encouraging. But how do you stay hopeful that we'll ultimately succeed?
What makes you think I do feel hopeful?
Fair enough.
Well, I mean, I sort of do, because I think that if you look over the long course of history, it's all, in general, moving in a positive direction. The problem with climate change is that it may be too late. I mean, it may be that we've already gone too far. The Trump disaster I regard as just temporary. I mean, I wouldn't worry about that. It's just he'll be gone and forgotten. But whether global warming will ever.
And on that note, about how we stay positive, I think there's a lot to be optimistic about. I agree with Richard's answer. And, Travis has walked out. I was getting ready to thank everyone and thank Richard, but you're doing that.
Hey, everybody. I just wanted to come out and thank Richard and Matt so much for coming to Toronto for this evening. Have you guys enjoyed the talk?